Darkness. Torch flickers. A whisper slices through the night like a blade. What happens when desire becomes a throne? What happens when a forbidden love burns hotter than truth, hotter than fear, even hotter than the voice of a prophet? This is the story of two hearts chained to passion, and one man of God who dared to challenge them. King. A queen who was never meant to be queen, and a prophet whose voice shook a palace built on lies. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. Videos like this one resonate with you, hit subscribe. 'Cause tonight, we step into the halls of Herod, where shadows whisper, where guilt breathes, where a single dance, a single promise, a single moment of weakness changed the destiny of a prophet forever. This is not just history. It is a warning buried in time, a flame that still burns, a truth that still echoes. Are you ready to walk into the palace where love became a weapon, and truth became a death sentence? The desert night pressed against the city like a silent witness. Jerusalem slept, but the palace of Herod did not. High on a hill, where marble shone like cold bone under the moon, a king walked alone. Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee, son of Herod the Great, yet forever haunted by his father's shadow. He breathed in the chilled air, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside him. Power weighed heavily on his shoulders. Whispers of betrayal clung to every corridor, and in the hollows of his soul, something darker stirred. He longed for stability. He longed for admiration. He longed to be more than a puppet king dancing on Rome's strings. But above all, he longed for her. Herodias. She was fire wrapped in silk, beauty sharpened by ambition, eyes that searched for crowns the way others searched for air. And she had been his brother's wife, forbidden, untouchable, a line that no king, no matter how desperate, should ever cross. Yet Herod crossed it. The desert wind carried the gossip across Judea like sparks leaping from a burning log. Priests whispered. Commoners murmured. Even Rome raised a curious brow. But one voice didn't whisper. One voice thundered. One voice refused to bow. The Baptist. Prophet. The man whose words carried the weight of heaven. He stood by the Jordan with the boldness of a storm, pointing not at sinners in the shadows, but at the king himself. It is not lawful for you to have her, he proclaimed. Every word pierced Herod's palace like a spear. Herodias heard those words, and she felt them like poison, not because they were lies, but because they were true. Truth is a flame, and Herodias hated how brightly John carried it. Inside the palace walls, Herod's thoughts were a battlefield. He admired John, feared John, even protected him. Because when John spoke, something in Herod trembled, something he didn't want to face. Guilt, conviction, a small flicker of conscience buried under miles of pride. But Herodias, she felt no tremble, only rage, cold calculating rage, the kind that waits, the kind that watches, the kind that plots in silence. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath. Servants moved carefully. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. They felt the tension like a coming storm. And somewhere deep in the prison beneath the marble floors, John prayed. He knew what was unfolding above him. He knew the cost of truth. He had seen kings rise and kings fall. He had seen God move in deserts and in palaces alike. Yet even in chains, he felt free. Meanwhile, Herod walked through his halls, haunted by a question he didn't dare speak out loud. How can I love a woman who demands I silence the voice of God? But love is a strange thing when twisted by desire. Blinds. It softens knees. It makes kings bow to their own weaknesses. Herodias knew this. She saw Herod's hesitation. She saw the cracks forming under his authority. And she pressed harder. "My king," she whispered one night, standing close enough to steal his breath. "You cannot be strong while a prophet mocks your throne." Herod looked away. He always looked away when truth touched too close. Outside, the wind howled against the palace walls, carrying with it the faint scent of the Jordan River, where John once called crowds to repentance, where sinners wept, where heaven opened, where Herod first heard the prophet's voice, a voice he wished he had never heard. Because once you hear truth, you can never unhear it. The palace lights dimmed, torches flickered, and in the darkness, destiny began to shift. Two lovers held together by forbidden passion, one prophet held by unshakable conviction, and a kingdom suspended between desire and righteousness. Storm was coming. No one could stop it. No one knew how loudly it would roar. But heaven knew. Heaven always knows. Soon, the throne, the queen, and the prophet would collide in a moment that would echo through eternity. Morning crept over Galilee with a pale, uneasy light. The palace stirred awake, but peace did not rise with it. Something simmered beneath the marble floors. Something sharp, something restless. Herod felt it before he opened his eyes. Heaviness, a weight pressing on his chest like an unseen stone. He sat up, rubbing his forehead, but the shadows followed him. He tried to shake them off. He tried to breathe deeply. He tried to command calm like a king commands armies. But his heart wouldn't obey. Herodias was already awake, pacing near the window. Her face was carved from elegance and fury. She didn't greet him. She didn't smile. She only turned slowly with that burning fire in her eyes. The people whisper again, she said. No matter what we do, they repeat his words. Herod closed his eyes. He knew which him she meant. Prophet. The thorn. The voice he could not silence in his own mind. Herodias stepped closer. They laugh at me, she hissed. They say I stole a throne. That I am a curse. That God himself has turned against our marriage. Her voice trembled. Not with sorrow. With resentment. Herod swallowed. People gossip about everything. It will pass. Herodias leaned in, pressing her palm to his chest. Her touch was soft, but her words sliced like a blade. It will not pass as long as John breathes. Herod flinched. He turned away as though the sunrise burning through the window suddenly hurt his eyes. He hated this conversation. He hated how it made him feel like a child. He hated how Herodias made righteousness sound like a threat. John is a holy man, Herod murmured almost to himself. And Herodias snapped. Does holiness give him the right to judge kings? Herod didn't answer, because deep down he feared the answer was yes. Herodias walked circles around him like a lioness around wounded prey. You are the ruler of Galilee. Are you so weak that one man can unmake you? Herod's jaw tightened. Her words always cut at his weakness, and she knew exactly where to cut. We have imprisoned him, Herod said. We have silenced him. Herodias's laughter was cold. You have delayed him. That is all. The people still cling to every word he ever spoke. They repeat his message like a curse. Herod clenched his fists. He tried to ignore the sting of truth. She was right. Every marketplace, every village fire, every gathering beside the Jordan, they still whispered John's message. Herodias moved closer again. Her voice a whisper that dripped with venom. If you cannot protect your throne from a man in chains, what kind of king are you? Silence fell between them like a wall. Herod felt it, that invisible thread tightening around his choices. A trap woven by desire, a net crafted by pride, a decision waiting to devour him. He walked away, leaving Herodias staring at him with narrowed eyes. She wasn't finished, not even close. Women like her didn't give up. They waited for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was coming. Deep beneath the palace, where the air was damp and the torches burned low, John knelt in prayer. His chains clinked softly with every breath. But the chains could not bind his spirit. He prayed not for freedom, not for vengeance, not even for deliverance. He prayed for Herod, for Herodias, for the kingdom drowning in its own sins. His voice echoed softly in the stone chamber, a lonely, holy sound. Lord, let truth still be spoken. Let light still shine. Even here. A guard passing by paused, listening. Something in the prophet's tone stirred him. A strange peace, a strange sorrow. Even in chains, John carried heaven with him. And that terrified Herod. The next day, Herod summoned John from his cell. Not to hurt him, not to kill him, but to listen. He needed something he couldn't ask of anyone else. He needed clarity. He needed truth. He needed someone who wasn't afraid of him. The guards escorted John into a dimly lit chamber. Herod dismissed the soldiers and stood alone, a king trembling in the presence of a prisoner. John lifted his shackled hands slightly. "Why do you call for me, Herod?" Herod swallowed. He hated feeling this vulnerable. "John, I need to understand." He paused, struggling. "Why does God condemn what I've done? Why is my marriage cursed in the eyes of heaven?" John looked at him, not with hatred, not with arrogance, but with deep, aching compassion. "You know why," John said softly. "Your heart already knows. Your conscience speaks even when you silence it." Herod's breath shook. He felt exposed. "Herodias says you judge us unfairly. She says you want to tear apart what we built." John stepped closer, chains rattling softly. "I do not judge. God judges. And truth stands whether a king accepts it or not." Herod's eyes flashed between anger and desperation. "You speak as though my throne means nothing." John's voice remained calm. "In the eyes of God, every throne that stands on sin trembles." The words hit Herod like thunder. He staggered back. He didn't want to believe it. But the truth pulsed through every syllable. "Herod," John whispered, "repent. Do not let desire blind you. Do not let Herodias lead you into darkness. Your soul is worth more than her ambition." Herod trembled. His lips parted. For a moment, a brief, flickering moment, he felt the pull of repentance, the urge to turn back, to step away from sin, to surrender to God. But a shadow crossed his face. Memory, kiss, a whisper, a promise made to Herodias. Desire tugged one way, truth tugged the other, and Herod stood in the middle, tearing apart. He lowered his head. "I cannot," he whispered. "I have gone too far." John's eyes softened. It's never too far for God. But Herod had already turned away, already retreating into the safety of denial. He signaled the guards. The moment was gone. As John was led back to the dungeon, Herod felt a hollowness grow in his chest, a feeling that he had just stepped away from salvation, and toward something darker. Herodias watched from a corridor, hidden in the shadows. She had seen John escorted back toward the prison. She had seen the tension on Herod's face, and she had seen the glimmer of conviction that terrified her. She stepped out, cold eyes fixed on her husband. "You went to him again," she said. Not a question, an accusation. Herod barely met her gaze. "He speaks truth. Truth I cannot ignore." Herodias stepped forward, gripping his arm. "Truth, or manipulation. He is twisting your mind, Herod. Turning you against me. Against your own throne." Herod pulled his arm away, but gently, timidly, like a man unsure of his own strength. "Enough," he muttered. "I will not kill him." Herodias's eyes darkened. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply whispered, with icy certainty, with quiet wrath, with absolute intention, "You will." Herod froze. Herodias walked past him, her robe brushing cold against his arm. Her steps echoed down the hallway, dark, final, foreboding. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. But she knew one truth with terrifying clarity. John would die. And she would be the one to orchestrate it. Because love twisted by ambition is not love. It is hunger. And her hunger had found its target. A storm gathered over the palace. A storm fueled by pride, envy, lust, and fear. A storm ready to break open history. And all of heaven watched. As the collision drew closer, night fell like a curtain of velvet over Galilee. The palace glowed with golden lamps and dancing shadows, but beneath its beauty something darker stirred. Something irreversible. Something hungry. Herod did not sleep. He wandered the halls like a ghost seeking shelter, but there was none. Every door he passed whispered doubt. Every torch he passed flickered with judgment. He felt watched, not by guards, not by servants, not even by Herodias, by truth. Truth has a way of haunting men who try to outrun it. And John's voice, the voice Herod tried so desperately to bury, followed him through every corridor like a persistent echo. It is not lawful. It is not lawful. It is not lawful. Herod pressed his palms to his ears, but the whisper lived inside him. He could not silence it. He could not outshout it. And worse, Herodias knew. She felt the shift, the hesitation, the softening, and she despised it. The day of Herod's birthday arrived with fanfare and noise that tried too hard to hide the turmoil beneath it. The palace buzzed with laughter. Nobles from across the region arrived in elegant robes, their voices loud, their smiles too polished. Roman officials strutted in with arrogance. Military commanders boasted, drinking wine like water. Tables overflowed with exotic fruits, roasted meats, perfumes from Egypt, silk from the East. Musicians played melodies that danced through the air like golden smoke. But beneath all the celebration, Herod's heart trembled. He sat on his throne, shoulders tense, eyes distant. The crown felt heavier today, like it knew, like it weighed the choices he had yet to make. Herodias watched him from across the room. She sat beside him, close enough to touch, but her presence felt colder than night. She smiled at the guests, but her eyes never left Herod. She waited, like a hunter, like a serpent uncoiling in tall grass. 'Cause tonight she sensed opportunity. And Herod was too distracted to see the trap tightening around him. Music swelled, wine flowed, laughter echoed, and then, like a shimmering spark, she appeared. Salome, Herodias's daughter, young, beautiful, radiant as moonlight on water. The moment she entered, the room fell silent. Herod blinked, startled out of his thoughts. What was she doing here? She was not part of the royal rituals, not part of the feasts. Herodias had always kept her separate. But tonight, Herodias sent her forward. The girl's eyes flicked to her mother. Herodias gave a small nod, poised, controlled, calculated. Salome stepped into the center of the hall. The musicians paused. Then they resumed with a different melody. Softer, hypnotic, alluring. Salome began to dance. It was not an innocent dance. Not a child's dance. It was a performance crafted with intention. A weapon disguised as movement. A dagger wrapped in beauty. Herod's breath caught. The guests leaned forward. Torches cast molten shadows across her figure as she moved with grace and fire. She spun. She glided. She swayed with a rhythm that turned the room into a spellbound silence. Herodias watched from her seat. Her lips curled ever so slightly. She had planned this moment like a mathematician constructs a perfect equation. Every step, every glance, every breath was part of the trap. Because Herod was a man who craved admiration. A man who basked in applause. A man who wanted to look generous, powerful, adored. And Salome's dance lit every weakness inside him. When she finished, breathless, the hall erupted with cheers. Herod rose to his feet, swept away by the moment. The drink, the desire, the roar of approval. "Ask me for anything," he declared, his voice thunderous, his pride swelling, "and I will give it to you." The room gasped. Even the Roman officials exchanged startled glances. This was dangerous, reckless. A king's oath spoken in the heat of emotional foolishness. But Herod didn't care. Not in this moment. Not with every eye on him. Not with every heart impressed. Salome looked uncertain. She glanced at her mother. Herodias rose from her seat like a queen stepping into destiny. She walked to her daughter, leaned close, and whispered something into her ear. Salome's eyes widened, flicker of shock, hesitation, even fear. Herodias's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. She whispered again, "Harper, Holder, Final." Salome swallowed, turned, walked toward the king, her steps slow, her heart pounding, her voice trembling. "I want," she whispered. Herod leaned closer. The whole room leaned closer. The head of John the Baptist. Silence. A silence thick enough to suffocate. Herod froze. The words punched the air out of him. He stared at the girl, stunned, pale, disbelieving. What? Salome's voice strengthened. "My mother says, I want the head of John the Baptist. Here. On a platter." Gasps rippled through the hall. Guests exchanged horrified looks. Even the Roman officials looked unsettled. Herod's heart plummeted into darkness. He staggered back as if struck by an invisible blow. John the prophet. The man he admired. The man he feared. The man he protected. The hall waited, watching, judging. A king's oath hung in the air like a chain around his neck. He could not escape it. He could not withdraw it. Not without appearing weak. Not without losing face before his commanders and guests. Not without losing the respect he fought so hard to gain. Herodias knew. She had always known. This was her moment. Her victory. Herod stared into Salome's trembling eyes. And behind them, he saw Herodias's cold, commanding gaze. The trap snapped shut. He felt it. He felt every sharp metal tooth bite into his throne. His soul, his destiny. Herod sank slowly back into his seat. His voice a whisper of defeat. "Bring me his head." The words tasted like ashes. The hall erupted into hushed murmurs. Salome exhaled shakily. Herodias closed her eyes, victorious. But heaven did not celebrate. Heaven wept. A captain reluctantly signaled 2 guards. They bowed, sorrow written across their faces, and left the hall. Herod watched them go, each step echoing like a funeral drum. His shoulders slumped. His crown suddenly felt like a burden too heavy for mortal bones. He had made a promise he never meant. A decision he would regret for the rest of his life. The music died. The laughter faded. The air thickened with dread. Herod closed his eyes for a long moment. And in the silence, John's voice rose in his mind. Steadfast, pure, unwavering. A throne built on sin trembles. Herod trembled. Down in the prison, John looked up as footsteps approached. The guard who entered did not speak. His eyes were heavy with sorrow. John understood before a single word was said. He nodded gently. "It is time," he murmured. No fear. No anger. Only peace. Because John did not serve a king made of dust and weakness. He served the King of Kings. The guard hesitated, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." John stepped forward, placing a hand on the soldier's arm. "You have nothing to fear. This is not the end. It is only the beginning." He lifted his eyes toward heaven, and in that final moment before the blade fell, a strange warmth filled the cell. Presence. A peace that the world cannot understand. John smiled. Because even in death, truth lives. The guards returned to the banquet hall, carrying a silver platter, carrying the prophet's final testimony. They placed it before Herod. Herodias looked at it without flinching. Salome looked away. Herod looked as though his soul had been carved out of him. But heaven saw everything. Every choice. Every tear. Every crack forming in Herod's heart. Tonight a turning point had been reached. Not just for John. Not just for Herodias. But for Herod. A king who stepped into darkness. To keep a throne that would soon crumble beneath him. The palace should have been alive that night. It should have echoed with celebration, with music, with the noise of triumph. But instead, silence crept through every hallway. Cold, heavy, unnatural, as though the very stones of the palace were holding their breath. Herod sat on his throne, but he looked less like a king and more like a man carved from sorrow. His eyes were unfocused, his hands trembled, his breath felt thin, shallow. The platter still lay before him, covered now, hidden, but not forgotten. Nothing could erase the weight of what he had done. Herodias stood tall beside him, triumphant. But there was a glint in her eyes, a flicker, something unsteady, a shadow even she could not fully hide. Because she had won the battle. The prophet was dead. Her name would no longer be mocked. But something deeper shifted. Something she did not expect. Something she could not control. Something divine. It began with the wind. A sudden gust blew through the palace courtyard, extinguishing torches with one violent breath. Servants gasped. Guards turned their heads upward. The flames burned low, sputtering like dying stars. And then the sky above Galilee rumbled. A low, distant sound. Not thunder, not storm, but something older, deeper. Something that made even the bravest guards feel a shiver slide down their spines. Herod looked up. For the first time since the execution, life flickered in his eyes. "What is that?" he whispered. No one answered. 'Cause no one knew. The air itself seemed to pulse. As though heaven were drawing closer. As though angels were stepping near. Outside the palace walls, farmers looked toward the horizon. Shepherds paused mid-step. Travelers stopped on dusty roads. A tremor, soft but unmistakable, rolled through the land. Something holy had been disturbed. Something sacred had been touched. And the earth responded. Inside Herod's private chamber, a candle flickered violently. The flame stretched, twisted, and then, extinguished itself. Darkness swallowed the room. Herod stumbled backward, startled. His heart hammered in his chest. Because in that darkness, he felt it. Presence. Not warm, not gentle, but righteous. A presence that watched. A presence that weighed. A presence that whispered without sound. "You have silenced my prophet, but you cannot silence my voice." Herod gasped for breath. He clutched his chest. He fell to his knees. "My God, what have I done?" The words escaped him before he even realized he had spoken them. Herodias burst into the room, alarmed. She found him trembling, pale, drenched in cold sweat. "What is happening to you?" she demanded. Herod looked up at her, eyes wide, haunted, terrified. "Do you not feel it?" he whispered. "The air, the walls, they're watching us." Herodias scoffed. "There is nothing watching us. Only guilt. And guilt is for the weak." Herodias stepped closer. Her shadow fell over him. "Stand up," she ordered. "You are a king." But Herod did not move. He couldn't. He felt frozen, held by something unseen. His voice cracked. "God is angry." Herodias grabbed his arm, pulling him up forcibly. "Enough of this superstition. John is dead. His voice is gone. His judgment is finished." But as she said the words, a shuttered window blew open with a violent roar. Wind blasted into the room, scattering scrolls, tearing silk curtains from their hooks. Herodias shrieked, covering her face. Herod stumbled back again, terror sweeping through him. And over the howling wind, a whisper echoed. Not from lips, not from human breath, but from somewhere beyond. "My truth is never silenced." Herod fell to the ground. Herodias backed away slowly, eyes wide, heartbeat frantic. In the flickering shadows cast by the swirling wind, she saw something in Herod she had never seen before. Fear of God. And she couldn't control it. Not this time. Not this fear. Down in the dungeon where John's body had been taken, something extraordinary stirred. The guard on duty, a hardened soldier, sat trembling. He heard singing. Untold. Not from human voices. It was like wind passing over crystal. Like light humming through stone. The sound grew. Filled the chamber. Filled his chest. Filled his eyes with tears he couldn't understand. The guard rose slowly, weapons forgotten. He approached the cell where John's body lay. There was no breath, no movement, no life, yet the air shimmered, as though angels stood in that tiny stone room, invisible but unmistakably present. The guard sank to his knees. He covered his face. He whispered through shaking lips, "Surely, this man was sent by God." Peace washed over him, holy calming presence, a presence that whispered reassurance. His mission is not ended. His voice continues. His truth will echo beyond the grave. Tears fell down the soldier's face. For the first time in years, he prayed. Above, Herod could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw John's gaze. Not angry, not accusing, but sorrowful, compassionate. That compassion haunted him more than any curse ever could. At dawn, Herod walked onto the balcony overlooking Galilee. The sky was painted in hues of gold and crimson. A beautiful morning, but Herod felt none of its warmth. He stared at the horizon, thinking he was alone. But divine intervention does not wait for kings to be ready. Prophet may die, but heaven never falls silent. As Herod looked out over the quiet towns and distant hills, he heard footsteps, soft, strange, not human. He turned sharply. No one was there. Yet a whisper entered his ear, clear as water, sharp as glass, soft as a dying breath. "You feared John's truth, but you will fear mine even more." Herod gasped. He stumbled. He gripped the stone railing as though the world itself tilted beneath him. "Who's there?" His voice broke. "Show yourself." A moment of stillness followed, a quiet that felt alive. Then another whisper, this one not condemning, not wrathful, but sorrowful. "Return to me." Herod froze. His heartbeat slowed. His fear melted into something else. A strange ache in his chest. Longing. A longing for mercy. Herod sank to his knees right there on the balcony. Tears streamed down his face. "I can't go back," he sobbed. "I have blood on my hands." The wind stirred. Gentle this time. Almost tender. "You have breath. Therefore you have hope." Herod bowed his head. For the first time in years, the king prayed. He prayed not with eloquence, not with pride, not with ritual. He prayed like a broken man whispering into the dark, hoping someone still listened. "God, show me what to do." Above the palace, clouds parted just slightly. An array of light fell onto the balcony, illuminating Herod's trembling form. It was small, simple, but unmistakable. Sign. A whisper from heaven that the story was not yet finished. Yet below the beauty of divine intervention, darkness still moved. Whispers still plotted. Herodias still watched. The battle between heaven and ambition was not over. It had only shifted. And heaven had stepped into the palace. Not with armies, not with thunder, but with whispers, with wind, with trembling hearts, with unseen angels singing over the body of a prophet. Divine intervention had begun, and it would not end until the truth, the whole truth, reshaped the fate of a king who dared to kill a holy man, and awoke the eyes of heaven in the process. The news traveled like lightning, sharper than grief, faster than the wind tearing across the Galilean hills. John was gone, a prophet, the voice crying in the wilderness, silenced by a king who feared the truth, and a woman who hated it. But heaven did not fall silent. Somewhere near the shores of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus sat among his disciples, the soft waves brushing the sand with a gentle rhythm. He had been teaching since sunrise. Stories, parables, whispers of the kingdom. People clung to every word. Because unlike Herod, unlike the Pharisees, unlike the rulers of earth, Jesus spoke not with fear, but with authority. Yet suddenly, a young fisherman's apprentice ran toward them, breathless, terrified, sweat streaking his dusty face. He stumbled, dropped to his knees, and whispered the words that froze the world. "Teacher, John the Baptist." He has been killed. The air shifted. The sea fell quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop mid-flight. The disciples looked at each other, stunned. James clenched his jaw. Andrew bowed his head. Peter's fists tightened around nothing but air, wishing he could strike the king who dared touch a prophet. Jesus closed his eyes. And for a moment, he simply breathed. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't surprised. But he was grieved. John wasn't just a messenger. He wasn't just a prophet. He was the forerunner, the one who prepared the way, the one who baptized the Messiah with trembling hands. And now, he was gone. A candle extinguished by wickedness. A voice cut short by a drunken oath. The crowd around them murmured, confused. What happened? Why would Herod do this? Why would God allow? But Jesus stood, his face calm, his eyes heavy with sorrow and something deeper, resolve. He looked at his disciples and simply said, "Come with me. We must go to a quiet place." They followed, up a hill, through a narrow path twisting between olive trees, until they reached a solitary clearing overlooking the shimmering waters below. No crowds, no noise, only silence thick enough to swallow a heart whole. Jesus knelt. The disciples stood behind him, unsure whether to speak or cry or pray. After a long stillness, Jesus whispered into the wind, "John has finished his work." His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of divine truth. He was a burning and shining light, and for a time, you rejoiced in his brightness. Peter stepped forward. "But Rabbi, why did he have to die? Why would God allow a wicked king to take the life of a righteous man?" Jesus looked at him, sadness in his eyes. "Because the kingdoms of this world fear the truth." And John carried truth like a sword. He stood slowly, his robe catching the soft breeze. "But remember this," he continued. "No prophet dies without purpose. No righteous man falls without heaven seeing. And no sacrifice is wasted." The disciples let the words sink in, like rain on dry ground, like fire on cold hearts. Then Jesus turned his gaze toward Herod's palace, visible on the horizon, a distant white shape glittering beneath the sun. "Herod trembles," he said quietly. "He believes the dead can return, because the living truth haunts him." The disciples exchanged glances. Matthew asked, "Do you mean he fears you?" A faint, solemn smile touched Jesus' lips. "He fears the truth. And I am the truth." The breeze strengthened, stirring the branches overhead. The sky deepened to a brighter, bluer hue, as though heaven leaned closer. Then Jesus did something unexpected. He sat with them, and began to teach again. Not about revenge, not about curses, not about fear, but about the kingdom. "The kingdom of God," he said gently, "is like a seed, buried, easily overlooked. But when it grows, it becomes greater than all other plants, and the birds rest in its branches." John, he explained, was one of those seeds, buried now, but destined to bear fruit far beyond his earthly life. The disciples felt the weight lift, just a little. Sorrow still sat with them, but hope sat beside it. Then, far below, the crowds began to gather again. Hundreds, thousands, families, the broken, the hungry, those searching for what John once thundered. "Repent, prepare, the kingdom is near." Jesus looked at the masses, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "John prepared the way," he whispered. "Now the way must continue." He stepped forward. The disciples followed, and the world shifted again, because the death of a prophet did not stop the plan of God, propelled it. That night, as they descended toward the crowds, something strange happened. Herod's name spread through the region, but not with admiration. People whispered that guilt consumed him, that nightmares haunted him, that he saw John everywhere, in shadows, in dreams, in the trembling of his own hands. Kings sleep lightly when they war against God. But Jesus, he walked with steady steps. He healed the sick. He fed the hungry. He lifted the broken. And every miracle whispered a truth Herod feared to hear. You can silence a prophet, but you cannot silence God. The disciples felt the shift too. Every act of compassion, every word of authority, every moment of divine power, felt like a continuation of John's mission. A mission that no prison could chain. A mission that no sword could stop. Late that evening, as the crowds dispersed and the stars rose, Jesus stood alone at the water's edge. The moonlight shimmered across the surface like a pathway of silver. He whispered into the night, "Your work is done, cousin. Mine has just begun." The waves answered with a soft hush, gentle, reverent, and heaven watched. Because the story was far from over. John had prepared the road. Jesus would walk it. Soon, the entire world would feel the impact of a prophet's final breath. Because sometimes redemption doesn't look like deliverance. Sometimes it looks like a seed buried in the ground, about to split open with life. And in the wake of John's death, a new fire began to burn. In the disciples, in the crowds, in the hearts of all who had once heard a wild prophet cry out from the Jordan's shore. The kingdom was coming. And no throne, not Herod's, not Rome's, could stop it. John's voice was silent, but his message echoed louder than ever. Through Jesus, through every miracle, through every word, redemption rose like dawn, and nothing could turn it back. The night settled over Galilee like a soft curtain, drawn slowly across the sky. Stars flickered awake, shimmering like distant watchmen keeping guard over the quiet earth. The world felt still, too still, as though creation itself waited for something, some final whisper, some divine truth hidden beneath the ashes of all that had happened, because something had shifted, something deep, something eternal. The death of John the Baptist did not just end a life, it revealed the fault lines in the kingdoms of men, and in the silent aftermath, a sacred question echoed across the land. What happens when truth collides with power and loses? People whispered in their homes. Mothers hushed their children. Old men stared into the fire with trembling hands. Rumors drifted like smoke. Herod couldn't sleep. Herodias paced the palace halls like a caged lioness. The servants spoke of nightmares, of screams behind marble doors, of a king who saw shadows moving even in the brightest corners. But in the villages, in the dusty streets, in the quiet places where ordinary people carried extraordinary burdens, whispers rose of another man, healer, teacher, Messiah, a man who spoke with the authority John once proclaimed, a man who touched the sick and lifted the broken, a man who walked with purpose, not fleeing from Herod's cruelty, but walking straight through it, as though darkness were nothing but a thin veil waiting to be torn. And the people began to understand. John's death was not the end of a story. It was the turning of a page. Because every prophet is a signpost, pointing, preparing, declaring the arrival of something greater, something eternal. John was no different. He had lived with wilderness in his bones and truth in his breath. He had confronted kings without trembling, and now, even in death, he confronted hearts. His silence spoke louder than any sermon, and the world, especially Herod's world, felt the weight of it. Meanwhile, Jesus moved through the towns with a quiet determination. No crown, no palace, no army, just truth, pure truth, unshakable truth, the kind of truth that outlives prophets, outlives kings, outlives fear. And crowds followed him. Men, women, children, hungry for hope, starved for meaning, aching for a God who still saw them. They carried memories of John in their hearts. His strong voice, his fearless warnings, his unmovable conviction. And as Jesus spoke, those memories glowed like embers stirred by a gentle hand. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, he said, for they shall be filled. Some wept, some trembled, some whispered that they felt John's spirit in the air, not literally, but in the fire of Jesus' words, in the weight of his presence. in the unstoppable momentum of the kingdom now advancing. For Herod, the story twisted into torment. But for the world, for the weary, for the faithful, John's sacrifice became a seed that cracked open the soil of human fear, a seed that gave way to a rising hope unseen before. And Jesus tended that seed with his steps, with his miracles, with every word that reached deeper than swords. Then came a day when Jesus stood alone on a hillside, looking out over the sweeping plains, golden under the afternoon sun. A soft breeze moved through his hair, carrying the distant hum of life, the sound of sheep in the valley, children laughing, women grinding grain. The world felt alive. Alive in a way Herod's palace could never feel. He closed his eyes, and the memory of John's voice came like a shadow whispering across his heart. Prepare the way. He didn't have to. The way was already prepared. The world was ready. Hearts were opening. Faith was stirring. And darkness, the kind that hides behind thrones and lies and forbidden desires, began to tremble, because light had entered the world, and it refused to leave. In the months that followed, the people continued speaking of John. His name became a symbol of courage, his story a warning to the corrupt, his legacy a lantern for the faithful. Even Herod could not erase him. Even Herodias could not silence him. For every time they tried to forget, his memory returned like the echo of a river, unavoidable, unending, unforgotten. But the greatest revelation came slowly, gently, like dawn creeping over the horizon. John's death wasn't only about sin and power. It wasn't just about cruelty or corruption or the cost of truth. It was about timing, divine timing, the kind that human eyes cannot see. Because even as John's voice faded, Jesus' voice rose. Even as John's ministry closed, Jesus' ministry unfolded. Even as a prophet fell, a savior stepped forward. And heaven whispered, "What is lost on earth is never lost in eternity." John's life was a torch. Jesus was the sunrise. The torch had done its work. The sunrise had come. And in that divine transition, in that sacred passing of light, the world saw a truth it had never seen so clearly before. You cannot kill a message God Himself has breathed. You cannot bury a truth heaven has spoken. You cannot silence a kingdom that is not of this world. Herod's throne would crumble. Herodias' name would fade into dust. But John's witness, eternal, because it pointed to Christ. And everything that points to Christ becomes immortal. And so the story ends not with a prophet's death, but with the unstoppable rise of the one he proclaimed, the Messiah, the Lamb of God, the light the darkness cannot overcome. Through Jesus, redemption spread like wildfire, healing wounds the world thought would never close, restoring souls that had been shattered by fear, drawing the broken, the desperate, the abandoned, back to the heart of God. And in this divine unfolding, a final truth shines like flame. Sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes love is fierce. Sometimes love costs everything. But the love God brings, the love Jesus reveals, the love John announced, it is the kind of love that outlives kingdoms, the kind of love that breaks chains, the kind of love that turns darkness into dawn. Because in the end, love isn't what we find. Love is what finds us when we're broken. Love is what lifts us from the ashes. Love is what rewrites every story, even stories written in pain. Herod tried to end truth. But truth rose again. Truth walked the dusty roads of Galilee. Truth healed the blind. Truth fed the hungry. Truth climbed a cross. Truth stepped out of a tomb. And truth still walks today. Still speaks. Still calls. Just as John once did. Just as Jesus always will. The prophet is gone. But the message lives. The king tried to silence heaven. But heaven always wins. And in the quiet places of your own life, in your heartbreak, your wilderness, your unanswered prayers, your shadows, that same truth whispers still. You are seen. You are loved. And no darkness can silence what God has spoken over you. this is the ending, and this is the beginning. If this story moved your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what part of John's journey, Herod's struggle, or Jesus' response spoke to you the most? Your voice matters here. And if you want more cinematic Bible stories, more deep spiritual insights, and more faith-strengthening journeys like this one, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It helps the channel grow, and it lets you join a community hungry for God's truth. Thank you for watching, truly. Your support means more than you know.